Welcome to the Butte Creek Mill. Butte Creek Mill is unique in so many ways. First of all, it's very original. There's a feel here of stepping back into time. There's plenty to see throughout all 4 floors. In 1872, pioneers with double-bladed axes and handsaws cut down trees that were already close to being 100 years old. The foundation pillars are nearly 2 feet square. The beams were mortised together and secured to one another with hardwood pegs. Boards made from logs were nailed together with handmade square nails that can still be seen throughout the mill today. It doesn't take long when viewing the craftsmanship to realize how talented these builders were, considering they had no use of power tools or any of the conveniences that builders enjoy in today's world. The stones that make this mill work were quarried in France and assembled in Illinois, then shipped around the Horn to Crescent City, California. Then, would you believe that these stones weighing 1,400 pounds apiece were brought to Eagle Point in a horse-drawn wagon? It's absolutely amazing that more than 134 years ago, these stones were installed and are still grinding grain today. This is the Butte Creek Mill Dam here. This is where it all started in 1872. This dam was built by John Daly out of logs originally, and the reason he dammed up Little Butte Creek was so he could dig a mill race a half a mile long that eventually would get to the site of the mill. The reason they dug the mill race a half a mile long was because the gradual nature of the water, by the time it gets to the mill, it's 14 feet higher than the level of the stream itself. That is what powers our turbine, is 14 feet of head that pushes down, trying to get out of the mill to turn the turbine to run the wheels. The mill race starts with our gates here. The gates can be opened and closed as needed, and during the summertime the water gets quite low in the creek here, and we have an 1872 water right, so we get virtually all the water that goes into Little Butte Creek below this dam. The nice part about that is it provides water for the fish all the way through to the Rogue River, because our mill is a non-consumptive water right. So we just have the water go through the mill and on out. So the fish always have a good habitat. This is where the mill race finally meets the mill itself after traveling a half a mile from our dam. The mill race goes underneath the mill and into our penstock, and that's what operates our turbine that operates the wheels that grind the grain. You have some excess water that pours off the front of the mill race that is in the form of a waterfall that goes back into Little Butte Creek, and then after the water has gone through the mill and through our turbine, it exits out in another waterfall further down. We're in the lobby now, where we've got all kinds of interesting artifacts on display that tell the history of the mill and the region. But I think one of the more interesting parts of the mill really is the lower level. So I want to take you down there and give you a tour of what we're doing down there and where the water comes in and how the mill operates. Here we are in the lower level of the mill, my favorite spot. You're going to notice a lot of interesting things around here, not the least of which is this fabulous stone foundation that was laid down in 1872. Some of these stones weigh 400 and 500 pounds. But let me show you over here where the water comes into the mill itself, which is where we get our power. The mill race starts a half a mile up from our dam on Little Butte Creek, and it eventually comes right down here, and by the time it arrives at the mill, it's 14 feet higher than the level of the stream. So when we release water out of the mill, it goes through a turbine, and the turbine is actually where we get our power. An interesting side note about this mill race is that the miller used to stand on the platform here and catch Chinook salmon with a pitchfork on a regular basis. But back in 1985, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife put a fish screen in, so the fish are now back in the stream where they belong. So no more fish for dinner at the Russell family. You're going to notice some things around here as you see the belts turning, that most of these belts were put together with rawhide lacing and were patched together on a regular basis by the miller, who is a very thrifty person. The belts go about 100 rotations per minute, and you're going to see, you can see one of the major shafts in the mill here where our turbine is located. The turbine is located, as I mentioned before, 14 feet below the surface of this water, so when the water exits, we get our power through the turbine. You're going to see the original scalper over here, and this scalper, which is all made out of wood, is from 1872, and this is the chute that the grain came down from the wagons when they delivered it, went into the scalper, and the scalper was water powered, and it cleaned all the dirt and grime off of the grain, and then an elevator took it back upstairs so it could be placed over the milling room so the miller could grind grain on demand. One of the artifacts here that is also quite interesting, I think, is a big giant 4-foot gear that has wooden teeth in it. These wooden teeth were found in mills because they were afraid of sparks. Sparks could cause fires, so when they had wooden gears, they were less likely to have sparks, so it was a safety thing. Another little interesting thing is we have some graffiti on the pillar here, and it says December 22nd, 1964. That's the high water mark from the flood of 1964. And just below that was the flood of 1962. That's the last time the water got in the mill, and at that time it wiped out all of the bridges within about a 40-mile radius of Eagle Point, but the mill stood. You're going to also notice some of the beams up above us here. You can still see that they're vaguely in the shape of a tree yet. Those beams were cut down over by Butte Falls and hauled down here with teams of oxen, where they spent the winter squaring them off with adzes and axes. All of the beams and all of the structure was put together with wooden pegs, no nails in it whatsoever. You're going to see some other gears turning here. This large gear was put here, it's actually a flywheel. It was put here because the stream would go dry in the summertime, and when it went dry in the summertime, they would put a belt over this and run it through the hand-hewn beam on the far end of the mill and hook it up to a steam-powered tractor. That steam-powered tractor would run the mill during times of drought. Nowadays, I happen to have the oldest water right on the creek, and I can pick up the phone and call the water master and say I need more water, and they will release more water to the mill to grind our grain. Come over here and take a look at some of the other interesting artifacts. You might notice this big picture up on the wall here. That is blown up from a tintype photograph of the mill in 1875. You'll notice there's pigs and dogs running in the area, and that was very common at the time. But essentially the mill hasn't changed much from that photograph in 1875. The door on the second floor of that photograph is still the same door that we use to auger grain into our storage bins. Well, let me take you over here and show you some other interesting artifacts that are related to the old days of the mill. A lot of people get a kick out of this bathtub. This bathtub was found in the debris in the basement of the mill, and this bathtub was used by the miller for a Saturday night bath whether he needed one or not. We also have old ice tongs that were used when people came to the mill to get their ice from the old cold locker that was part of the mill at one time. We have ice saws, we have augers that were used to put the beams together. You can see the notch in the beam up above here where the belt went through when they ran it on the steam-powered tractor. You can also see some old hand-forged tools. We have a pedal power knife, axe, and scythe sharpener. And this thing was handmade, and this is what they used at the mill to sharpen up their tools. We even have a leather tool kit that we found in the basement here that was filled with tools from the 1800s. And of course, the kids always get a kick out of this old machine here. This is a 1870s washing machine made out of wood. And of course, the woman would put her water and clothes in there and then have to turn this wheel to agitate her clothes. And after her arms were ready to fall off, she'd wring the clothes out and hang the clothes on the dryer. Now she might have to do that, or I should say on the line, she might have to do that 10 times in a day. And of course using old lye soap that was made by hand. We have the old drill press that's still in its original position from the 1870s in the mill here. It still works just as good as it ever did. Once again, you had to have pretty strong arms to use it.